Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hello. Good evening, Kitch, and welcome all to My 70s with an absolute legend, Mr. Peter Kitchen.
Hi, Gabby. How are you
doing, mate? And when I say legend, I mean Doncaster Rovers, Orient, Fulham, Cardiff, Happy Valley, Orient, Las Vegas, Americans, Dagenham, Chester, and Corinthian Casuals. That's one hell of a list, mate.
yeah, certainly is.
Your football journey began in Mexborough on the 16th of February 1952, the same area as Jeff Salmons.
That's right. Yeah, there was a few. It was a really great area for young footballers coming through. There was Jeff Salmons, obviously. He was playing for Sheffield United in the late 60s, early 70s. Alan Sunderland was at the same school as me, and since then there's been a lot of other footballers that have come from that area. So yeah, it's a real good grounding for young lads coming through.
Now, I'm guessing that both Alan Sunderland and Jeff Salmons wasn't in the same sets and grades as you, because you were extremely intelligent, went on and got A-levels, and were a very, very educated football player. Although they were both educated when it comes down to playing football, and Sammy was signed in Northern Cyprus by Tony Waddington, and instantly him and Alan Hudson were roommates.
Yeah, I mean, Sam had a very good career. I mean, he did very well at Sheffield United and then went to Stoke. And funnily enough, I was at Doncaster. I remember playing against Stoke when they just won the League Cup final.
Yep.
And I think it was 72, and we played them in a pre-season friendly. And in that Stoke side, they had Gordon Banks in goal. Yeah. They had, Dennis Smith and Bloor at the back, Sammy in midfield. And also up front, they had Jeff Hurst.
Yeah.
So Stoke were a real powerful team in those days.
We had so many great sides in the 70s. And your football career started off at Doncaster as a teenager. And I was listening to a previous broadcast of yours. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I didn't realise it was the great George Rayner that scouted you up.
Yeah, I mean, I as I said, I didn't go into football in the usual way with an apprentice and then coming through the youth team. My dad. It started with my dad really. I was 16 and I'd never had a coaching session in my life. I was playing for the district team and I was just a natural footballer. Yeah. And my dad, who was a coal miner, I remember him in his Yorkshire accent saying to me, "They're not going down pit that and stay on at school and get this and a good education," in his broad Yorkshire accent. And so I stayed on at the sixth form college and left at 18 with 3 A-levels, 10 O-levels. But while I was there, George Rayner I was playing for Yorkshire grammar schools and I played a couple of games for England grammar schools. 11, and George Rayner had been following me for a few months and coming to our games for Yorkshire, and they approached me and asked me if I'd like a trial. So I came down and started playing with the youth team, got selected for the rest of the side against Middlesbrough, who won the youth league, and then I got asked by Laurie McMenemy if I'd like to sign as a pro. I was totally out of the blue. I mean, I'd never even dreamed about becoming a professional footballer. And so, I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd just finished my A-levels. And I thought, well, it was at that time, you could have gone into football. If it didn't work out, there was plenty of jobs, other jobs you could do. Yeah. So I signed and as I say, the rest is history.
Isn't it incredible, though, with George Rayner, he took Sweden to the 1958 World Cup final against Brazil, but then when he come back to England, I mean, he couldn't get a job in English football, and it was Alan Hudson that told me he was coaching Alan while he was on a week's holiday with his brother and his mum and dad at Skegness. It's quite incredible, George Rayner's football story as well, isn't it?
Well, I think George was... did a lot of work with the schools and that. So he wasn't, shall I say, the standard type of football coach in that respect. And he was a very quiet man, a very nice man. He wasn't someone who put himself forward and that. So, I think that because he hadn't had the league experience in England, that people were reluctant to go with him. But as I say, he was a very knowledgeable guy, and you can't take a country like Sweden to the World Cup finals without having an awful lot of football knowledge and awareness.
Absolutely, and I think in the same way that Jimmy Hogan was overlooked, and Jimmy Hogan worked a lot with kids in schools, and particularly in Germany as well with Jimmy, and I think it's a common thread that in this country we haven't listened to coaches. We've listened to people that have been given jobs, and in many of those situations they haven't liked to give the football to players Monday to Friday or Monday to Thursday, and then they expect you to play football on the Saturday. They seem to have had the opinion that if you're starved of the ball during the week, you'll want it the weekend. It's crazy, isn't it?
That is exactly the mentality that pervaded through football in the early 70s. I mean, Laurie McMenemy signed me and the first year I did very well in what's now League One, but he got sacked at the end of the season because Doncaster were relegated. Yeah. And they brought in Maurice Setters, who actually, had a very good playing career, but he was a hard man. Yeah. He was the sort of hatchet man you'd have in midfield. And that's exactly what Maurice used to do. We used to run all week round the racecourse at Doncaster. We were very fit. But we never got a ball.
Crazy jumping hurdles.
And then on Friday, you'd practice a few free kicks. You'd play a five-a-side, and it wasn't even a friendly five-a-side. That the players would be going in and kicking other players, and him and the coach would be encouraging you to do that. Yeah. It's incredible, really, when you look at the other extreme nowadays, and you compare the sort of likes of Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola, and the purest way they play football, and you compare it to the 70s, and football is a little bit, shall I say, incestuous in that a lot of people bring their mates in, so that they're going to play exactly the same way. They're going to encourage. They're going to agree with the manager, and so you get this perpetuation of it. And I know you do your weekly podcast with Terry Curran, and Terry comes up with some fantastic, dialogue about managers and coaches in this country. Yeah. And he's right about it, and I think the reason is really it's fear. Yeah. It's fear of losing the job. The people get into football management, and the first thing they do is they go out and they try and start from a defensive point of view, because that's what all the pundits say. You've got to have a strong defence. Mm-hmm. And I totally disagree with that, because I don't believe. I mean, I don't want to go off the tangent onto talking too much about coaches, because it's my opinion. Yep. But I believe that the only way you'll find out how good players are by giving them license to go out and play, and you'll find out their weaknesses. Yeah. And as a manager, that's what you should be doing. You should be looking at your players, find out the ones that are good enough and that could go on and progress, and the ones that have reached their limit. And then it should be a gradual process of replacing those players over a season, a couple of seasons, and the best managers know how to do that. They know how to get that balance of players right. But, unfortunately, we seem to have this thing, well, let's go out not to lose. Instead of going out to win games.
I think you're right. The best managers are the builders. They want to build teams, and they want to build teams on the philosophy of going forward and winning games. And no greater exponent of that than the great Bill Shankly. And you hit the bar against Liverpool in the early 70s when you were bottom of the 4th division. They were top of the 1st. How did that feel, that game against Liverpool in the FA Cup?
Oh, that was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
I mean, we had at Doncaster, funnily enough, had some very good young players.
Yes.
Under Maurice Setters, but we weren't a very good team. There was no real framework to the side. It was about going out, running your nuts off, and getting your foot in, trying to stop the other team playing. And we went to Anfield, and no one gave us a hope in hell. They were top of the 1st division. We were bottom of the 4th and struggling. And we were 1-0 down after 10 minutes. Kevin Keegan scored. And everybody more or less thought that was it. It was going to be, a total collapse, and they'd probably get 6. And then I scored an equaliser, and big Brendan O'Callaghan up front, he scored another goal, and we went in at half-time 2-1. And the Kop and the Liverpool fans gave us a standing ovation.
Yes.
Because we'd matched Liverpool. In the second half, it was a different story. It was like the Alamo. And they threw everything at us, and Keegan scored. And it was 2-2, but we were holding out. And then in the last minute, the ball was knocked over the top, and my legs were as heavy as lead, and I was chasing it aimlessly, and all of a sudden Emily News dithered, and so did Ray Clemens, and I just stuck a toe out. And I toe poked the ball over Clemens, and it hit the top of the crossbar, bounced a second time on the crossbar, and then dropped onto the pitch, nearly onto the goal line, and then Emily News ran back and cleared it. And had that gone in, we would have won that. It would have been one of the great cup upsets of all time, I think. But we played the replay at Doncaster during the miners' strike. So there was no electricity, or there were power cuts. So the game was played on a Tuesday afternoon, and apparently all the kids had bunked off school for the afternoon.
It's a shock.
We lost 2-0, but what a great experience, and I know TC remembers that game very much.
He certainly does, and he remembers his Doncaster years very, very favourably as well, because like yourself, he was a teenager that come into that Doncaster team. Stan Anderson was the manager that you most favoured at Donny, and he had a totally different football philosophy, didn't he?
Oh, exactly. It was just what I was looking for. I mean, I was a player that wanted to play with the ball at my feet, and I close control and quick feet. And what happened? Morris got the sack, and Stan Anderson came in. He'd been coach. He'd been at Middlesbrough, manager at Middlesbrough. He played for all the north-eastern sides and captained them. He was a very cultured footballer, and he'd been coaching at AEK Athens. And he came back as manager, and the first training session, he got a great big bag of balls out and gave everybody a ball, and he started doing all this training with balls, and we were all looking at each other because we'd never seen this, as I said. And it was amazing that the difference from me as a player, was amazing. I think that season he came in, I think I'd scored about 10 goals in 25 games, and then the next 10 or 15 games, I think I scored about 15 goals. It was incredible, and he simplified it, and he encouraged people. He was calm and encouraging to players instead of picking up all the things you don't do. And that's a real thing, I think, in football. You know, and you hear the pundits telling you what players don't do, but it's nice when they say what they do, what players do bring to a team.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, it was great. And after that, you know, my career took off in terms of goal scoring. I think next 3 seasons I scored about 70 goals. I was voted in the PFA All-Star divisional teams for 2 seasons. And I had, you know, I was sort of at the point in my career, I was no longer a young player, shall I say. I was 23, 4. And, you know, I thought I've got to get away.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
It took a lifetime to find the person you want to marry. Finding the perfect engagement ring is a lot easier. At BlueNile.com, you can find or design the ring you've always dreamed of with help from Blue Nile's jewelry experts who are on hand 24/7 to answer questions, and the ease and convenience of shopping online. For a limited time, get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com. That's $50 off with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com.
I've got to try and get to a higher league and see how good I'd be. So I started saying, you know, I wasn't going to sign a new contract. And Doncaster kept me for a whole season on the option of my contract. Yeah. And then they had an approach from Ipswich, who were then second in the first division, asked me if I'd come on trial. And Ipswich first team had finished all their games, so they were off in the Middle East playing a couple of games, and I played a couple of reserve games and a testimonial game with the first team when they came back, and scored 2 goals in 3 games. And I thought Bobby Robson called me into his office at the end of the period, you know, the loan period, shall I say, and said to me, you know, you've done very well, son. I'd like to sign you. How much do Doncaster want for you? I said, well, they keep quoting 60, 70,000 in the paper. I think they'd accept 45, 50. And he said, well, I really want to sign you, but he said, I was thinking of, say, 25. I might be able to take it to 28, but he said, I can't even promise you a game in the reserves. I've got Wymark, Mariner and Woods in the first team, and I've got Eric Gates, Alan Brazil, Robin Turner and Geddes, who was on loan at Aston Villa at the time. And he said, I can't even promise you a game in the reserves. So they offered 28. Doncaster refused it. And then I was told about a week later that they'd agree a fee with Orient of 45,000, which I later found out was more like 35,000. Yeah. So I was really, disappointed in that. And I came down to Orient to talk terms with them. And I didn't really want to move south. Yeah. That was the strange thing that I'd said in the paper. I don't mind where I move to, but I don't want to go to London.
SRBMedia. And you're sitting on a train going to London.
Oh. And it was amazing because I thought, well, I'm not sure. They wanted me for a 3-year contract. I said, no, I'm not sure I'll settle here. So I said, oh, let me think about it. I need to talk to my wife. I need to look at houses and that, because obviously it's a lot more expensive. And I came back down to Orient, and we went looking round the areas and looking at houses and everything. And they agreed to my terms of a 2-year deal and what I'd asked for personally. And so I shook hands with the chairman and the manager, George Petchy. And I went back on the train that day, got home to Doncaster. I got a phone call from Stan Anderson, and he said, how did it go? I said, yeah, it went okay. He said, have you signed? And I said, well, no. He said, but I've agreed to sign. He said, we've had another club come in for you. They've matched Orient's offer financially. So he said, and I said, well, who is it? He said, well, I don't think I should tell you if you've agreed to sign. And I said, well, look, I've agreed to sign. I've shaken hands on it. I'm not going to go back on my word now. And he said, oh, it's Tottenham. So, but, you know, you had old-fashioned values in those days. You know, you shook hands and it was your word. And that was your word. And so I ended up coming to Orient. I mean, as it happens, you know, it worked out very, very well. But, you know, that's the way football went. You know, it could have been, I could have achieved more. I enjoyed my career and I had a good career. But, you know, I always wanted to play in the first division. And I think that was the disappointment, not doing that.
It was a case of deja vu, wasn't it? Because when you'd signed for Doncaster, you were also wanted by Leeds United and you'd already given your word, hadn't you, to Laurie?
Yeah. I mean, it came to my house. Laurie came to my house with the contract. Yeah. And this was in 1970. Yeah. And, you know, he said, well, I want to meet your parents. And he came and he said, you know, he gave them all the talk about, you know, looking after me and, you know, encouraging me and all the things that managers say. And so I signed the contract and he got in his car and he went off back to Doncaster. Mm. And about 3/4 of an hour later, got a knock on the door. And it was a scout from Leeds United. He knocked on the door and said, oh, I'm from Leeds United. I've come to have a word with you about whether you'd like to sign for Leeds. And I said, he said, I've just signed for Doncaster. And he said, oh, well, I can't say any more then because, you know, that it would be illegal for me to talk to you if you've signed for Doncaster. So he said, you know, sorry about that. And he headed off and Leeds it was the great Leeds team of 68, 70. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, some of the players in that side I've admired, you know, I'd grown up admiring those guys. Funnily enough, 2 weeks after signing for Doncaster and starting back on pre-season, we played a pre-season friendly against that Leeds United side at Bellevue, and it was amazing. That was me. I'd been watching all these guys before, and you know, never dreamed about being a professional. And I was sitting on the bench in this friendly against that great Leeds United side. So, you know, what a great memory that was.
SRBMedia. When you look back at football, I honestly think that the greatest champions and the greatest team that we've ever produced in this country is that Leeds United team of the early 70s. I think that they didn't win as much as what they possibly could have and should have, but that come down to referees' decisions and briberies. But they were everything that you would want from a football club and more, wasn't they?
Oh, they were fantastic. I mean, you know, they had Big Jack at the back. The full-backs, Reaney and Terry Cooper, were great overlapping full-backs. In midfield, you had Bremner, Giles. They were wonderful footballers. They were ahead of their time, really. You know, they could play as well as kick. And up front, you know, Alan Clark was a great goal scorer. Yeah. And he had Mick Jones up front, who was, you know, his foil, shall I say, did a lot of the running off the ball. And you had Eddie Gray and, you know, wonderful footballers. And it was funny because that game, I remember that game distinctly, that friendly, because I was watching from the bench, and a ball was knocked up front, and our centre half was a young lad called Steve Wignall, who went on to play and manage. And he jumped up with the ball with Alan Clark, and the ball dropped. And as he went to clear it, Alan Clark went and kicked him straight down his shins.
A sniffer.
And I thought, this is a pre-season friendly. And, you could see all on the park, people like Johnny Giles were leaving their foot in. You learn, if you watch Leeds, you learn so much about professionalism. Yep. And, they used to pick the ball up as if they were going to do a throw-in and then drop it behind their back and then run further on, and someone else had come and get it. They just had this incredible professionalism and strength of character. Liverpool were a great side as well, but I think Leeds just never didn't win, as you say, as much as they should have done.
Absolutely. Who were your heroes growing up, Pete?
Well, initially, I suppose the first one was obviously George Best.
Yeah.
I watched the European Cup final in '68 and Bobby Charlton. I thought Bobby Charlton was probably one of the greatest players this country has ever produced. And the man is such a gentleman, such a quiet, unassuming guy. Him and George Best were unbelievable footballers. But then as I sort of, got into play myself, my favourite player was Tony Curry.
Yes.
And, and I think it's funny because all through my career, I've played with good wingers and I've played with some good players, but I've never played with a really out and out creative midfield player.
Yes.
And Tony Curry was just unbelievable on the ball, and he didn't look ever to be under any, rushed in what he was doing. He used to pick passes out. And then after that, I would say Glenn Hoddle. Yeah. Played against Glenn Hoddle a few times, and the guy was a genius on the ball. Just playing against those guys, you realise it. I'd love to have played with a creative midfield player. When you play in a side that's in the lower divisions and you're struggling, you're not in the top of the table, and you're not one of the top sides in that division. You realise the reason for that is that there's only 2 or 3 or 4 exceptionally good players, whereas when you get into the first division, the Premier League, there were 7 or 8 brilliant players, and you used to see when you had a creative midfield player, after Hoddle there was Trevor Brooking. I remember playing in a couple of charity matches with Trevor Brooking, and I'd be making runs along the line, and he was just picking you out all the time. But yeah, I would say they were players that stand out for me. In terms of the international players, people like Eusebio and Cruyff, obviously brilliant. Pelé, these players, they're icons, aren't they, of football, and they'll be with us all forever, shall I say. We'll always be looking at them and thinking about what great players they were.
Absolutely. I remember interviewing Alan Clark, and Sniffer told me how instrumental in his career in the early days when he was at Fulham, Johnny Haynes was. And Johnny would say to young Alan, just make your run, son, and I'll find you. And you're absolutely right in what you're saying. When you've made that run as a forward player, to have a midfield player that can just put that ball in your stride. And Alan said the easiest thing I done was put the ball in the back of the net. and it does make your job easier when you have midfield players with creativity, doesn't it?
I mean, when you play up front and you're playing along the back line and you're looking to make runs in behind defenders, or you're coming short to get the ball and hold it up and then bring other players in. And the number of times you make these runs and you're waiting for the ball, or it comes 2 seconds later, too late. And then when you get there, you get clattered from behind.
Yeah.
Or you run offside.
Yeah.
And that's because players don't see the bigger picture. They don't see the runs you're making and the space and where it is. And it's only when you see these guys playing that they play with this vision. And that always stands out to me.
Absolutely. Was your Orient debut as special in terms of goal scoring as what your Doncaster debut was, home and away? Because you scored it after 59 seconds at Shrewsbury, didn't you?
90.
Sorry, 90. Sorry.
Yeah, on my league.
You were a bit slow there, Kitch.
Yeah, on my league debut was at Shrewsbury.
Yeah.
And I scored my first game in the team, and I scored after 90 seconds.
Yeah.
And the following week at home, we played Swansea, and I scored after 95 seconds.
Yeah.
And there was a joke going around the dressing room that with the players, and they said, if Laurie says if you haven't scored within the first 5 minutes, you're going to bring you off half time. But no, it took me a little bit longer, Orient. I think I was a little bit more nervous, shall I say,
yes,
at Orient, because when you go for a transfer fee, whatever that is, whether it's a big fee or a smaller fee, there is always an element of pressure.
Yeah.
And I was making the step up from the old 4th division to what's now the Championship. And although I felt I was going to score, I knew I was going to score goals if I get the chances.
SRB Full Podcast is available at www.patreon.com/SRBmedia. SRB Media.
If there's one thing that my family and friends know me for, it's being an amazing gift giver. I owe it all to Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site that has amazing gifts for every occasion. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing gifts. And the more gifts I give, the more perks and rewards I earn. To learn more and take your gift giving to the next level, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.